Is everyone ready? Okay, so welcome everybody to this webinar called User Avatar Bond, Risk and Opportunities in Gaming and Beyond. So we have a fabulous webinar for you today with an expert panel discussion, including Professor Kwan Min Lee and Associate Professor Rabindra Ratan. This webinar is brought to you by the Cyber Psychology Research Group here at the Institute for Health and Sport at Victoria University. My name is Dr. Peter Gill and I'll be your host for today. So I'm going to give a brief introduction and an outline of the webinar today, and then I'm going to hand over to our next speakers to introduce our expert panel. Before we start, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. So I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we all are located today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Now just a quick outline of the webinar today. First of all, Taylor Brown and Trent Footet, who are both PhD candidates within the Cyber Psychology Research Group at Victoria University, are going to introduce our panelists. Next, Dr. Vasilios Stavropoulos will give an overview of the topic area just to introduce us. And then from there, we'll get into our expert panel discussion. So the areas covered today, so we're going to introduce the notions of presence and self-presence first, then look at some of the risks and opportunities related to the experiences of presence and self-presence in virtual worlds. And then we'll have a discussion around the state of the empirical evidence in a broader area and also some future research directions. Then we'll have about a 10-minute period for some questions from the audience. And then finally, myself and Vas will close the webinar and make some closing comments. Yeah, so that is all for me for now. And I'll now hand over to Taylor and Trent to introduce our panelists. Oh, sorry, over to Vas. Sorry, Vas to give an overview. Sorry.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah.
So, Internet applications employing engaging virtual worlds have been proliferating, both in the context of gaming as well as in social media, with Facebook's new metaverse context captivating interest and a pivotal question rising. Why is virtual reality that attractive? Everyone is situated between their reality and their fantasy. In reality, people sometimes might be together with others but unsatisfied because they don't live their dreams. While in fantasy they are lonely, they might be lonely but satisfied. And there is a border between the two, a clear boundary, which can often be bridged by new forms, new types of virtual reality applications, where one can be concurrently with others and satisfied, living their dreams. And this appears to depend on how one experiences their virtual context, often defined as presence or telepresence, as well as how one experiences themselves online in the virtual world, often defined as self-presence. Presence is a psychological phenomenon that occurs in the human mind and not in the specific technology. The user might be using the technology to experience the virtual context, the virtual world, and when they ignore the mediating role of the technology, they end up feeling there, experiencing presence. It's like looking into a landscape through a window frame and forgetting the window frame. You feel as if you're there. Considering self-presence, in online games, mainly until now, Players tend to assume the role of a character called avatar and take control over that character's actions and development. A number of players can be concurrently present in the game, while the game's persistent world continues to exist and evolve, while the player is offline and away from the game. It's like sharing a collective dream, according to some. In Hinduism, an avatar, derived from the Sanskrit word avatāra, is a deliberate descent of a deity to earth, and is mostly translated to English as incarnation, but more accurately as appearance or manifestation. And one can follow a range of different virtual life paths. They can choose who or what they would like to be and represent it by. According to some, avatar is a royal way to the unconscious. And it has been supported that 4 major channels, psychological channels, connect the user with the avatar. The user might feel that they are who their avatar is. I am who he is or who she is. Identification. My avatar's needs are my needs and may be prioritized to my real life needs, what is often called as immersion. My avatar can do there things that I cannot do in my real life, defined as repression, and my avatar can be there who I would like to have been in my real life, or my ideal self, idealization. In that context, persistent questions have emerged regarding the potential benefits and the risks of such virtual life features. And this question can be practically translated into: how can we maintain the benefits and reduce the risks related to one's experience of their digital world and their digital self? And this is the question that we are hoping our discussion today to cover. And Taylor and Trent can continue with presenting our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaz, for that wonderful introduction to the topic. I will now introduce one of our panelists. Greetings, my fellow colleagues and esteemed panelists. I'd like to thank you all so much for joining us in this webinar today. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce one of our esteemed panelists, Professor Kwan Min Lee. Professor Lee is a professor of new media and the director of the User Experience Lab at NTU. Additionally, Professor Lee also directed the Samsung Electronic User Experience Group, where he led the development of new products and services for its visual display division. He is internationally known for his extensive knowledge and experience in information and communication technologies. He's received many top paper awards and various teaching awards, including the USC Mellon Award for Excellence in Mentoring and Teaching. His area of expertise include user experience research and design, social and psychological effects of information and communication technologies, and human-machine interactions. Professor Lee has published over 100 articles and book chapters in major academic journals and textbooks in communication, human-computer interactions, and psychology, including one of my personal favorites, which is titled Presence Explicated, which has been cited over 1,000 times. He's served editorial boards of more than 10 top-tier academic journals, including Media Psychology, Journal of Communication, just to name a few. Additionally, his research findings have been covered by numerous major news agencies, including the Washington Post and BBC News. His current projects include the Interaction Science User Experience Lab and social responses to virtual fintech agents, as well as many more. We are honoured to welcome Professor Lee to this webinar. I would now like to pass it on to my colleague, Trent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Taylor. And again, I would like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce our second esteemed panelist, Associate Professor Dr. Robbie Rattan. Dr. Rattan is an Associate Professor and AT&T Scholar at Michigan State's University Department of Media and Information, as well as Director of Social and Psychological Approaches to Research on Technology Interaction Effects, or the SPARTY Lab. Robbie has authored over 50 peer-reviewed articles and has seen research support as a principal investigator for prestigious grants such as the National Science Foundation grant and numerous subcontracts as well. His area of expertise includes human technology interaction, how media technologies such as avatar, agents, and automobiles can influence meaningful outcomes in persuasion, education, and health and safety. And he's also particularly interested in the Proteus effect, as well as the implications of avatars in both gaming and non-gaming contexts. In addition to this, he's also looking into the effects of gender stereotypes in gaming on STEM engagement. And we are very, very lucky to have him with us today, as Dr. Rattan is also an incredibly prestigious presenter, having done talks and keynote speeches with TEDx, as well as hosting the MSU Sparty Cast podcast. And so with this, we are very honored to welcome Dr. Robbie Rattan to this webinar. And I'll pass over to Taylor, who will start up our first section. A brief overview is that we'll be looking through several different topics as presented by Peter before. Section 1 will address our descriptions of online presence and self-presence. Section 2 will cover the potential risks and opportunities for the experiences of online presence and self-presence. And the last section, section 3, will address the current research in the field and some potential future research priorities. Thanks so much for that introduction again. I'll pass over to Taylor.
Thank you, Trent. We'll now start off with the first section with the questions as well. Professor Lee, how would you best define the experience of presence and why is it important?
Okay, can you see me?
Yes.
We can.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this interesting webinar. Here is 10 a.m. in Singapore. I believe it's afternoon in Sydney, in Australia, and also evening in Michigan. So good afternoon and good evening there. Presence. I think presence is a fascinating topic from the start of my career. And I think not only for me, but also many communication and media scholars, as well as media psychology scholars who are interested in media, because in essence, presence is about media experience. So when you experience media, when you experience communication and information technologies, presence is at the heart of all this media and technology experience. Before this kind of advancement of information and communication technologies, presence is kind of phenomena that that you find yourself when you are immersed in very well made film, very well made book, very well written book, or maybe very well written computer games. But nowadays, because of this metaverse, because of this virtual reality, augmented reality, all these technologies that we use on a daily basis, I think presence is becoming part of our daily routine. And we seek presence not only in our entertainment experience, but also in our work experience as well. I think COVID-19 situation brings this another aspects to this presence scholarship, which is that previously we studied presence, we studied this immersive experience, usually in the context of entertainment experience. But now with COVID-19, we now realize that for productivity, for work experience, presence is also very important. So if you look at all over the world, many startup companies, like especially in the United States, and many other startup companies in Asia, also in Europe and Australia, they want to create this new presence experience for productivity. And I think this is going to be a very, very fascinating area, very, very important area. And also not only startups, many big giant players like Facebook now is getting into this area. So many students out there and also scholars out there, if you keep studying presence, and I think you can contribute to the, not only the literature, but also academia and also society. Okay, back to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Lee, for that insightful response. So from what I'm hearing, you say that presence is important for many aspects, and especially currently we're seeing in the COVID-19 productivity and the importance of that coming up months as well. Professor Rattan, how would you define self-presence, and why would you think that it's important?
Oh, that's a tough one because I have a love-hate relationship with self-presence. I loved the idea when I first read about it. In the article one that you mentioned earlier that Kwan wrote, Presence Explicated, he talks about self-presence. It's related to presence in the sense that it's a psychological kind of immersion element of using a virtual space or any mediated space, but it focuses on the avatar. So I would define self-presence as the extent to which you feel psychologically connected to the avatar that is representing you. Now, why do I have, so I have a love-hate relationship because I love the idea of this psychological relationship with our avatars. I think it's a really interesting factor in our media use, but I also have the antagonistic relationship with self-presence as a concept because it is so hard to define clearly in ways that are distinct from other very related topics, such as identification, which was on the slide earlier from Vasilios, the idea of embodiment. There are other aspects of kind of connection to a media character that we've thought about as media scholars for decades, long before avatars, like parasocial relationships. There are many ways we can think about this psychological connection. So the concept is fraught. And I think fundamentally, though, just calling it a connection, a bond, the avatar user bond, the extent to which you feel like you're there in the avatar, you're present in the avatar, the illusion of non-mediation in the avatar, treating a mediated body as an authentic body. All of these are ways to define it. But I think what's more interesting and why we should care, which I guess is your second question, is that this experience of self-presence will influence how you use these media technologies and the outcomes of that use. So Dr. Lee here has studied media technologies from an early time, engaging with VR, also robots, media technologies that we just saw glimpses of having a really important impact on our lives. And then, as you said, in the COVID pandemic, we have immersed ourselves so deeply in their uses outside of entertainment. And so does self-presence make a difference when I'm in a Zoom meeting? Well, yeah, it does actually, and it's not a great thing. We did research on Zoom fatigue, and we found that the more you are unsatisfied with how your face appears, so facial dissatisfaction, the more Zoom fatigue you feel. And that's a self-presence, right? I feel very present in this avatar that all of you are seeing, that I'm staring at, making sure right behind my video camera here that I'm presenting myself in a positive way. So self-presence can augment some of these outcomes of media use in ways that are good or bad. I mean, the good ways, of course, relate to feeling like you're immersed in the avatar. So then the experiences that you have with other people, that social presence element can be stronger. Being influenced by the avatar, the Proteus effect is in theory stronger if there's a high level of self-presence. So I see self-presence as important and as a factor of media use that deserves our attention as scholars because it augments the effect of media use, maybe to a greater extent than any other type of medium we've studied before, because we haven't really had self-representations in this way. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's always a good thing. Does that nuance come across?
Thank you so much, Professor Rattan. That was a very interesting perspective on the topic of self-presence. And I find it actually really interesting with the love-hate relationship with self-presence, particularly how it can be difficult to distinguish them with other constructs. So thank you so much for that. And I think that leads really well into our second section of the webinar, which covers the risks and opportunities related to the experiences of presence and self-presence. Once again, I would like to start with Professor Lee. What are the risks and opportunities you identify as an expert related to the experience of presence?
So as I said, right now we are seeing this expansion of this concept, or the expansion of the importance of this concept from entertainment area to this work area. So I think the future, the interesting area for the future of presence study is how presence contribute productivity, how presence contribute our work life. So and also because we are now using this kind of presence software or presence app that represent ourselves in so many different domains. So as a scholar, we want to experiment, we want to study possible effects of presence in different domains of our life. For example, so work productivity is one area. Another area is like a new area such as, say, fintech. Like for example, so if you're in a fintech, the many investment literature shows that the reason why you are losing money in financial investment is because you are selling your stocks at a time that you are not supposed to sell. So you are selling your stocks when everybody sells the stock and when there is a panic in the market. But actually, that's the best time to keep your stock. And if you just stand still, keep your stock with you during these difficult times, and eventually then you can make more money. But because we are only human, we have this our emotion, we have fragile sense of security. So if everybody is selling the stock, if you feel insecure, then you end up selling your stocks and end up having this loss. So with this presence, many researches, many studies by Dr. Robbie shows that the avatars in your lab, in your games, influence the way how you think about yourself. So in a fintech situation, what if you put yourself as a wise investors with a lot of this experience? Maybe there is like some kind of you look like very seasoned investors, and then you get this advice from fintech agents which are supposed to help you, and then you get other advices from many wise investment gurus, and then you see your avatars on the fintech app, and how does it affect your investment decision? How does it affect your behaviors, especially in very, very difficult times? So I think this is an interesting area, and my current study shows that there is some effect, especially with regard to these agents, and also there are many different nuanced results that you see about this complicated relationship between agent and avatar in this fintech situations. So that's like an example. Another example can be like, medical situation. How do you make a decision for really, really difficult medical decisions? And how does your avatar help you in making that kind of wise decision for yourself and for your family? So I think the future of presence research is the expansion of the domain, and maybe we need to work more to explicate the concept in a greater detail. So we had this work on presence explication. Dr. Robbie did a great job on self-presence, and now Dr. Robbie, because of that great work, he has this love-hate relationship with the concept. And probably maybe the students, maybe other scholars can develop even more profound explications about self-presence. And with that kind of conceptualization, I think we can apply that concept more enhanced explications for future studies. Okay, back to you, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Professor Lee. That's such an interesting new area of research that I'm excited to read more about, and especially with it being expanded to the work life and productivity. It's really interesting. So thank you for your response. I would now like to pass it over to Professor Rattan, and specifically, given the time and how broad the risks and opportunities may be, I thought we could emphasize something that you have written in a paper titled Avatars, Characteristics Induces Users' Behavior Conformity with a Small to Medium Effect Size, which I had the opportunity to read. Fantastic read as well. which said that developers could use this information, the Proteus effect, to influence a user's behavior, which in my mind sounded both as a promising opportunity and a potential risk. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, a promising opportunity and a risk. The phenomenon, for anyone who isn't as deeply embedded in thinking about it every day like I am, basically suggests that when you use an avatar with certain characteristics, so let's use this great fintech example. One study showed people in an older avatar compared to same age avatar, and when they used the older avatar, they chose a more conservative investment portfolio. And you can also, another age-oriented study, which actually was published in our I think there's an age one in our special issue, but it affects how fast people walk and perception of effort while they're engaging in exercise. Oh yeah, that was it. Another one, the wise avatar that you suggested, who you use when you're making decisions about whether to buy or sell stocks. Well, that reminds me of multiple studies which have found when you use a more creative avatar, it looks like an inventor, it has a clipboard or a lab coat. You will come up with more creative ideas in a brainstorming task compared to wearing an avatar that has plain clothes. And so there's something about the avatar that influences our self-perception. And Dr. Lee Kwan, he's always been a hero of mine as a theorist. He comes back to this idea of careful explication and theorizing, and the Proteus effect is actually not very well theorized. So the paper that you're referring to is a meta-analysis. We looked at about 40 studies that had been published at the time. We actually just submitted a kind of part 2 to that meta-analysis now with over 50 studies comparing studies that use virtual reality to those that just used a computer screen. Spoiler alert, we find that the effect size is stronger when people used virtual reality. I think one of my co-authors on that paper, maybe two, are actually in the audience today. So yeah, so we can change how people think based on their avatars. That's great. We can get them to exercise longer, eat healthier food, invest more conservatively, be nicer to their kids, go clean up the environment, pick all your pro-social outcomes. And then we can also get them to buy the shaving cream or the car or the house or the stock or the cryptocurrency, or to marry the person who is going to steal all their money, or some other person, some swindler, some catfisher, right? Advertising is used in good ways. It's used to subsidize the production of mass media, and we need advertising. It promotes kind of information ubiquity around markets, and free markets can be very good for society. But on the flip side, there's the potential for abuse. So that's one of the reasons why people should worry about this metaverse thing. We're getting ready for Facebook and many other companies. It's not just Facebook, many other companies to build worlds where instead of Zooming with you right now, I'm doing it in this headset, and we have eye-to-eye contact. I don't have to like force myself to look at the camera, and I can pass you a virtual object, and we can design it. And maybe we're designing a car or something. We can design those 3D objects together. I can have big virtual screens. I can use my real keyboard to type. I have that software right now. I can load up this Zoom call actually in my VR headset. So there are so many ways that these technologies will be integrated into my daily life, and it's the potential for psychological nudges through the Proteus effect or many other factors of presence and self-presence toward things that are both good for us and maybe not as good for us is a bit scary. I mean, you can imagine the nudge wars with political influence, right? So I don't know, does one political candidate put out as an NFT, a free NFT or a cheap NFT, an avatar that you can use now that, you know, illustrates your allegiance to the political camp, right? And how does that affect your behavior? Maybe it's done in a subtle way. Maybe it's not the political camp. Maybe it's the fancy brand shoes, right? The luxury Gucci bag. You get the Gucci avatar too. But now Gucci is taking money from the XYZ campaign and somehow imbues characteristics into those free Gucci avatars that push people toward voting for a certain political candidate. This is, I'm just making this up on the fly, but it's a scary potential for influence, and it's a great one too. The good and the bad and the ugly.
Thank you so much, Professor Rattan. That was very interesting. And I completely agree, especially with the metaverse that's coming out. It's going to be really interesting to see what's happening with that. Professor Lee, do you have anything that you would like to add to that discussion, potentially in relation to presence and maybe risks that might be connected to it?
Yes, I agree with Dr. Robbie that there are a lot of these risks involved in the use of these avatars in our daily lives. But if you think about it, before IT technologies, we use all kinds of things to represent ourselves, and also all kinds of things have influenced our behaviors and other things. Like, for example, in Korea, all these males, they need to serve these military services. And there is a very interesting saying in Korea that even though you finish your military service, but when you go back to this military camp for the military reservation training after you finish your military service, so then it doesn't matter how old you are. As long as you wear this military uniform, then you behave like soldier. So I mean, 40-year-old or maybe mid 30 years old, this old age man in Korea wearing this military uniform and behave like 20-something kids. So we know that this kind of clothes affects your behavior in a similar way that the avatars on your screen affects your behavior. And also, if you think about this avatar and think about the influence of the makeup, think about the influence of, like in old time, ancient times, if you wear a mask, the mask that you are wearing lets you forget about your true identity and behave you as if you are someone with that kind of identity that the mask represents. So we have this kind of technology, old technologies with us all the time that influence us, our behaviors. So it's not a new phenomenon. It's something that has been with us for a long time. But now, because you are spending a lot more and more time online, more and more time with technology, the influence of this kind of presence inducing technologies becomes more serious and more important. And also, I mean, another kind of a comment to Dr. Robbie's previous example was that now I see that actually he talks about the nudging. And previously, I don't see many communication graduate working in this economics or nudging area. But as of last year, one of my PhD students here at NTU got a job in the city of London, working for this nudging department in the city of London. So I think
I heard about that. That's like part of the city, right?
Yes. So this is interesting, and actually they are kind of experimenting all many different things. Like, for example, we are afraid of the use of this metaverse by Facebook and other big tech companies that try to manipulate us in a very subtle way that we buy their things, we are influenced by, I don't know, their ideas, by political campaign, etc. But at the same time, like some governments, some cities, they try to use these technologies and nudging mechanisms or maybe avatar-based nudging to influence our behavior in a somewhat positive way, and hopefully. So there's a pros and cons, and then like many things, we should be aware of possible dangers, but at the same time, we should take advantages of this kind of fascinating technologies. So like a media literacy, maybe in future, not from now, maybe starting from today or starting now, I think we need to do some kind of a literacy education, VR literacy education, presence literacy education, so that our future generation clearly knows, similar way that our previous generation, they clearly know about this possible manipulation by media. And if it's too much, then you have this regulation mechanism. Similarly, we need to know about this possible manipulation mechanisms with this avatar online games and presence technologies. Then if it becomes too much, maybe then the government and policy makers, they need to put some regulation if needed.
Can I jump in on that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to hear more.
So I think you're so right, Kwan, that we've got these pros and these cons, and it reminds me so much of other new media technologies and the way people respond, right? Like these phenomenon are very deeply rooted psychologically. They're not new, as you say. But we worried about violence in video games, 30 years ago, even 40 years ago, that they were going to cause aggression in society. 40 years before that, we worried about comic books. There's always been a concern about mass media having an influence on society in negative ways. And I don't want to discount some of those concerns. I agree that, like you said, being aware, being critical is important. But I think the audience is mostly comprised here of research-minded scholars, right? We're all interested in doing research on these technologies, and the question is, do you want to focus on the downsides of these things, the dangers, the fears that will stoke our critiques, which is useful in society, or do you want to emphasize the potential benefits, the nudges, like in the city of London, toward, I don't know, making people recycle more, or pick their dog's poop up off the ground, or can work in other ways that are good for the environment, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, right? These things are so important for the environment, for society. And as scholars, I think you kind of have to make a choice. I certainly recognize the critical side, but I have made a choice to focus on the positives that we can encourage through our research. So that's what I would encourage all of you to consider doing with your own research.
That's an amazing addition there. Thank you, Robbie. And very interesting to see how much this integration is coming to our current everyday society that's coming on, and the things we need to prepare for that. Obviously some potential benefits for that. Moving on from that point, it kind of flows quite nicely here to section 3. How would either of you describe the research in the field currently, and potentially some of our future research priorities in this area? Would you like to start us off, Robbie?
Sure. Currently, it's hard to put a pin on the current research because so much is coming out right now. People were very productive over the pandemic, and so I'm constantly seeing Proteus effect studies, avatar related studies, both positive and negative. I'm not seeing many metaverse studies. I'm definitely seeing a dearth of crypto and metaverse and blockchain studies. So I don't know, to characterize the state of the research right now, I think is difficult. But I would say that there are two directions we seem to be going. One is advancing our theoretical understanding of how these phenomena occur, the Proteus in particular, Proteus effect. I do see papers trying to delve more into the theoretical underpinnings. And for better or worse, they're offering new explanations. I'm not seeing a lot of great empirical work in that realm, though. That's something that I strive to do, but I just haven't seen anyone do a great test of why exactly the Proteus effect occurs. What are the components? I've seen theories about it, but no one's done a great test of that. But then the other side is research that kind of replicates the phenomena in new contexts. And if I'm speaking to PhD students here, I think I would discourage you from pursuing that type of research because it's not as impactful. It doesn't break new ground in the same way. Like, oh, the Proteus effect now in fintech, now in age, now in the environment, right? I mean, it's great to illustrate that the effect is reliable, and that's why we do a meta-analysis to kind of cohesively describe what's happening there. But we should really be breaking new theoretical ground. Quan, I think you agree with me?
Of course. I think this is very important. But at the same time, I don't necessarily see this kind of I don't know. I do not want to download the expansion of the domains of the concept to these different areas, because you never know until you test it.
That's fair.
So maybe some future PhD students, if they want to expand the current study to different domains, that itself is worthwhile pursue, because there are some subtleties, there are some nuance, there are some some things will change. So I think
that could be theoretically rich too, is what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, so like classic mentorship to your PhD students, you need to first think about theories and then thinking about expanding your theories to different domains, etc. If you cannot come up with your own theories, then maybe you can start by applying the theories to the different fields. So that's another approach. And then while you're applying the theory to another field, you discover something new there as well. So that's a very legitimate way. And with regard to this theorization and this concept development, I think I said this in my class before. Maybe Robbie, you are familiar with this. I want to see more influence of this evolutionary psychology and neuroscience in the explanation of this self-presence. Maybe one of the reasons why you have love-hate relationship is because you do not have this hard evidence that supporting this concept. Maybe the hard evidence can come from neuroscience, can come from different disciplines. But I think there are something out there, and I think we want to see this expert in other areas provide us some evidence in here, or maybe we ourselves need to study the methodologies in other areas and apply those methodologies to the development of theories in our area. So I want to see more and more of this kind of interdisciplinary influence in terms of this theorization of this concept. So for example, self-presence, maybe we see this evidence for the self-presence, evidence of the effects of self-presence in the cognitive level, affective level, and behavioral level. And in the cell level, in the behavior, in the neuroscience or brain science level, if we see other kind of hard evidence there, I think it will be a very interesting, very interesting expansion of the theory. So, not sure about self-presence. I'm not sure whether we have this like clear critical cases of neuroscience evidence for self-presence, but at least for the social presence concept, I think we have a very good case of illustrating the mechanism of social presence in our brain by comparing these normal people and this abnormal, the people who has some kind of disability or have some kind of a limited capacity to process social information, such as like Asperger's syndrome or maybe these people with autism. Then by comparing the two different types of people in their process of media technologies that try to provide a rich social presence experience, if there are any kind of differences in the way how they process information, I think that's a kind of a good case. That's a critical test of the mechanism of social presence by comparing these two different cases. For self-presence, if you have that kind of theorization, if you have this kind of special cases of self-presence, people, participants, then I think we can provide some evidence for that. Yeah, I think it will be interesting. I think ultimately, if you are like a philosopher, if you can conduct thought experiment like Daniel Dennett, and if you can really do something like where am I experiment that coming from that article from Daniel Dennett, and I think you can find some evidence for self-presence, but you cannot do that in your life. It's possible only in a doubt experiment. So then, since you cannot do that in real life, maybe if there are some patients, if there are some special cases, then you can contrast between normal people's process of self-presence and this special cases process of internal process of self-presence. And by comparing these two, I think you have some cases showing that this is the mechanism how self-presence work, and this internal linear brain. And that's kind of very important module, very important part of our brain that is responsible for self-presence. I don't know how it works, but I think it
can I just pause?
Yeah.
You know, Kwan, I think once per conversation between you and I, you say something that is just so theoretically rich, and I just want to file it in my brain. That is such a good idea. So the metaphor of taking people on the spectrum and comparing their social presence experiences with those who aren't, to thinking about self-presence. So you're right. I bet there are some psychological conditions like self-disassociation pathologies, right? And maybe Vasilios, you are familiar from the psychological perspective. I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I don't know, but we have people here who are closely connected to psychology. That's a great idea, Kwan. We should definitely pursue that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, let's do that.
Thank you for those incredible insights from the both of you as well. To expand on that a little bit further, do you see from your work in the industry and the current state of research any potential synergies between, say, academia and the industry at large?
Okay, Robbie, do you want to go first?
Well, I think you are much better suited to talk about this given your experience with Samsung and other companies. I'll very briefly say I've talked with Meta now a little bit about the metaverse, and maybe they will support a project in my lab focused on inclusion in augmented or virtual reality. And I think it's great that that a company like Facebook, which is under a lot of public scrutiny for the potential damage that they do in society, I think it's great that they're willing to invest in what we might consider pro-social uses of their technology. So, so if you have the luxury of engaging in that type of relationship with industry, that's great. But sometimes, you know, you're just helping out from a research perspective. There's a company that I'm consulting with that's making a metaverse-like world in Thailand that kind of connects virtual real estate with physical real estate, which is a really novel idea. And this isn't under NDA. There was a news report on this, but I think that's great. I'm happy to help them because I'm enthusiastic about the technology, but they don't really have a pro-social agenda. So for me, that's a careful balance. I chose this career so that I could try to do good in society, while also thinking about the stuff that I love. And so, yeah, just to respond to that general point, that's a consideration for me. But fortunately, you know, I think it's possible to do both if you navigate it properly. But go ahead, Kwan, because you've had such an interesting and impactful experience working with industry.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating time for our students, for scholars in communication and information, because now we see these applications of what you learn from the class, from the school, and then you can apply this in real life, and the industry, the outside world. They now begin to realize that these communication scholars can influence the way how they produce new product, the way how they design new products, the way how they planning new products. So I think this is an interesting time. So in terms of this like industry applications of presence, there are so many. I mean, of course, I mean, from the beginning, the IT industry is all about presence. So they, the only difference is that the engineers and the content creators, they just focus on this the dimensions that they know, but at the same time, because they are not psychologists, they are not media scholars, they do not have this holistic view of how this whole things work. So maybe this insight coming from presence studies, insight coming from media psychology, we can inform this industry people that there are some specific dimensions. There are some specific dimensions of technologies that provide biggest bang per buck. So if you're gonna spend, let's say $10 million for certain aspect of your technology, then if I were you, if I'm the CEO, then based on my research, based on what I know, I would bet this dimension of technology. So by dimension of technologies, you are referring some kind of variables in technology. So it can be like, for example, it can be screen size dimension. It can be a fidelity dimension. It can be audio video synchrony. It can be like the resolution dimension. So like, for example, in VR technologies, there are so many different dimensions that each company can focus on. So at the beginning of VR technologies, I think one of the biggest hurdle for VR technology is asynchrony, because the video and audio channels does not synchronize with each other, and also the movement of your avatar, the movement of your head, and the movement of this outside world does not synchronize with each other very well. So asynchrony, I think for me, is the biggest enemy for the feeling of presence. So some companies, rather than focusing on developing technologies to solve this asynchronous problem, they focus on developing technologies for providing high resolution. So if you have $10 million, which dimension you want to focus on? If I were the CEO of the company, I would definitely focus on creating technologies that solve this asynchronous problem rather than this resolution problem. Because media psychology shows that up to a certain degree, after a certain degree, the video fidelity does not matter that much in terms of our presence, in terms of our appreciation of the media content. And then after a certain threshold point, what really matters is the synchrony, synchrony between your movement and the environment movement. Like, for example, the video fidelity. I mean, all different people have a different visual fidelity. If I have very low eyesight, then my usual visual fidelity is very low. And also, if you think about this visual cognition, this visual perception literature, usually we see the outside the world, low visual fidelity. So low visual fidelity is kind of perfectly normal, everyday experience. Whereas the synchrony, our normal experience is always synchronous experience. So if we move our head, we see different sides, right? And if there's any discrepancy between your head movement and the change of this outside world, then you feel dizzy. It's something very unnatural. It's something that you never experienced throughout your evolution, throughout your entire life, and throughout your whole ancestors' evolutionary timeline. So that's very unnatural experience. If media create a kind of very unnatural experience, you cannot feel presence. So the point is that there are so many dimensions. Technology companies, because they cannot focus on all dimensions of technologies. And this presence scholarship, the media psychology, can inform this company which dimension of technology they can focus on. Then they can make a right decision. There are numerous industry examples that CEO made wrong decision in investment in particular dimension of their technology, and the end result is that they got out of business. Like, for example, like LG Electronics, they withdraw their business in smartphone because for a long time they focus on different wrong dimensions of smartphone technologies. In the end, they were not able to compete against Apple and Samsung. And then if you are the CEO of Apple, what dimension of technology you want to focus on? Here is another example. Like if you look at the difference between Netflix and Apple TV, you realize that because in terms of technology, there are not that many things to differentiate yourself from other streaming players. So Apple, like many things that they did, they focus on, I think that's a very smart decision. I believe Apple TV, in addition to this creative content, they focus on this audio fidelity dimension. They emphasize a lot about this like very crystal clear sound, very realistic sound, and all their content, especially the Apple original content, they emphasize a lot of subtle audio fidelity. There's a big difference between Netflix original and Apple TV original. That kind of a decision that you make based on what? Based on your gut feeling, but at the same time, maybe the CEO can make that decision based on this experience. But as a media scholar, we know which decision is right, which decision is wrong, and we can give them some advice on that. Or maybe if you are still out there, you can create your company, you can be an entrepreneur, you can bet your life, bet your entrepreneurship on a particular dimension that you think is most important for the experience of presence for yourself. And if that really works, then you can create your next Facebook. Back to you.
Thank you so much for that one, Dr. Lee. And thank you again for yours as well, Dr. Ratan. Yeah, really exciting potentials going forward for a lot of things. Be interesting to see, what this online medium role is going to have in the future in a lot of different domains. Just to wrap up section 3 now, I'll open it up to our audience to see if we've got any questions for about 5 or 10 minutes or so. So if anyone's got any questions, please put them through in the chat and we can see how many we can get to. Otherwise, in the meantime as well, do either of you see potentially in the self-presence field the potential for the use of, say, VR and our avatars in combating stereotypes and use potentially therapeutically or in e-health aspects?
Absolutely for stereotypes. But it's difficult. So on the one hand, perspective taking is known to increase empathy. There's perspective taking therapy that's been done long before virtual reality, where you imagine that you're, walking a mile in a person's shoes. On the other hand, some scholars are critical of this idea because of the potential for kind of cultural or racial appropriation. This idea of identity tourism, taking an entire culture's experience and trying to boil it down. 30 minutes in VR as a Black person in America is not going to give you the experience of what it's like to be a Black person in America, not even near it, right? Might it increase your empathy? Might it decrease your implicit bias? Absolutely. And there are plenty of studies. I just talked about this in class today, so it's super fresh. So there are plenty of studies which show that embodying a Black avatar by white participants does reduce implicit bias. So is that a good thing? Potentially, yes. But then given the concern about identity tourism and oversimplification of a cultural experience, I think these interventions, if we start to build them out, need to be done in a very sensitive way. I know there already are some out in the workplace. Actually, I know that one of Dr. Lee's amazing colleagues, Dr. Vivian Chen, recently did research on cross-ethnic embodiment in the Singaporean context, which is very different than the US context. There are different ethnic groups, racial groups to consider, but I think fundamentally we do find a reduction in stereotyping. So that's one benefit. The other one, though, that I think is a little less intuitive, and there's not much research here, is in a virtual world, sure, I can go and embody a different avatar, but we generally want to be ourselves. There was this kind of utopian promise that people like Sherry Turkle from MIT in the 90s imagined about places like Second Life. Oh, we're gonna shed our marginalized racial identities, and we're all gonna be equal, and race won't matter anymore, and kumbaya. And that didn't happen. Why? Because race matters to people. It's part of their identity, stereotyped or not, right? And so we bring with us our identities into these virtual worlds, and then we get judged for them. And if we don't think about just race, we think about gender. Absolutely. If you are a woman avatar in a competitive video game, you will be treated differently. Maybe negatively, maybe with toxicity, which is quite common, and I've written a lot about that. Also, maybe in positive ways, unwanted kind of sexual advances, which are not positive, I should say, but they're not like antisocial. They're overly kind of overly, what's the word I'm looking for? Suggestive. So what can we do? Where can the metaverse improve this situation? I think there's a great potential in Zoom meetings with avatars to allow people to identify with their avatars, customize this avatar, represent yourself as much as you can, but we're also going to add other information. Maybe it's a sign on my forehead, or maybe it's something more subtle than that draws your attention and gives you, I don't know, a badge that shows on my shirt here the type of professor I am. Maybe not just my rank, but my college, my school, or in the workplace. Maybe it shows what teams I've been working on, what my skill set is. Like, can I code in Java or not? And then, of course, people might know this history who are working with me in my immediate team. But when we have larger meetings, when we go to the virtual all hands meeting, or we have team building in these virtual environments, if we can increase our emphasis on identity characteristics that are not stereotyped for stupid reasons because we're feeble-minded, ape-brained humans, and instead emphasize these characteristics that will improve productivity and community in the workplace. I think there's a great potential there, and so this is speculation. But I've said this maybe 20 times in the last week and a half in interviews about the metaverse, or just conversations, because I'm optimistic that these technologies could be used to reduce some of the harmful effects, in particular stereotyping, toxicity, bias. But it needs to be done in kind of creative ways that take into account the psychology of using an avatar, as well as kind of creative design principles. Does that make sense? Kwan, what do you think about that idea?
I really appreciate your comment about this possible danger of using psychological experiment, maybe 30-minute or 1 hour use of these avatars can reduce racial, gender stereotypes, etc. And then that kind of regard it as if this kind of a solution to this problem. But it's not that simple. So maybe we should have, I think, because of course, you do this 1 hour, maybe 30-minute exposure to this different avatar, maybe you can have this different experience, different perspective based on that person's identity. But for you to really understand the difficulty, or to really understand the perspective of this particular gender, race, or whatever, then you need to immerse yourself more. So in the field of design, there's a method called participatory design. So, like, for example, if you are the designer who happen to be a designer of this clothes for the pregnant woman, and you happen to be a male, you have no idea what this pregnant woman need in their daily clothes, okay, in their everyday lives. So in the design example, these designers, they put a lot of this kind of things, extra weights in front of their stomach. So they have this kind of weight around them, and they leave this kind of extra weight in front of their stomach for a month. And then after a month of this experience, they came up with this new clothes for pregnant ladies. So that's that tells about the kind of a commitment, requirement for you to really understand the situation with this kind of people with different race, different identity, etc. So, and also in the design, like for example, the accessible design, if there is a case of this young female designers who want to design furniture, everyday items, or this like public facility design, so that these public facilities and everyday furnitures and these kind of things can be easily accessible by elderly people. So this lady designer disguised herself as a 80-year-old, maybe 90-year-old, very old lady, and then move around the world, not only in her own country, but all over the world, try to find out the difficulties of the elderly people in using everyday facilities. And then after this year of this experience, she published a book, she designed, she provides some guidelines for the new design of this public facilities for the elderly people to easily access them. So you need this kind of like a deep level environment for you to really understand what's going on with these other people with different identities. So yeah, so 1 hour experience with different racial identity, different gender identity can be a starting point, but you need to go deeper. So if you look at the Sherry Tucker's previous writings, actually the Sherry Tucker's case, she followed this case of this mod player who used mod for a long time, maybe for more than a year. Then it will have a strong effect on your identity. It will have a strong effect about the way how you see people with different identities. So you need to have that kind of like a real commitment for you to understand the difficulties of other people. So that's about like it can be both dangerous and then it can be a solution to these future problems. So with this kind of background, I do believe that, as Dr. Robbie said, yeah, this virtual reality, these avatars can help you, can solve some problems that you have with regard to this health, with regard to this stereotype problems. But at the same time, we also see a lot of dangers, like with these typical stereotypes. So we need to be very subtle. We need to have like many things in our life. We need to have a balanced understanding about pros and cons of a particular technology. So otherwise, you'll end up using technology in a very shallow way. Maybe at the beginning, you can claim that it changed a little bit, but that kind of changes will not have a long-term effect in solving the problem that we have, or you try to solve. So I see a lot of potentials using technologies for reducing stereotypes and for also promoting health, promoting or solving problems that we have.
That's amazing. Thank you so much again, Dr. Lee and Dr. Rattan. Yeah, really interesting and encouraging potentials for the future that we're going on here. I will pass over now to Vasilios and get him to summarize and wrap up what we've had today. Thank you so much.
I'm not sure where to start. I think that was definitely a conversation that absolutely absorbed my attention and made me feel present in terms of the ideas that were described, the dangers, the risks, everything. I will try to start with a phrase that Professor Quang-Minh Lee used to describe an experiment, the "where am I" experiment, and paraphrasing to "where are we?" Where are we exactly? And I feel that we are in front of an exciting period of technological developments when it comes to virtual reality, where different scientific fields such as communication science, IT, psychology are going to meet, but also face challenges in terms of the usage of these technologies for the benefit of the public, and in order to improve people's lives. The conversation today I'm saying tonight because for some of us it's evening, for some of us it's morning, for some of us it's afternoon. This conversation today had 3 main sections: risks and opportunities, describing presence and self-presence, risks and opportunities, state of the empirical evidence, and future priorities. When it comes to what presence and self-presence constitute, Professor Kwan-Min Lee highlighted that presence constitutes an opportunity, a great opportunity, especially in the context of the social isolation measures of the COVID-19 pandemic, where people had the opportunity to work online, and companies or employers had to figure out ways to make them more present in the online medium, which became the medium of their own employment, to be more productive. Professor Rattan highlighted that self-presence, as in the way I feel about who I am online, can be a quite challenging concept to be defined. He said, he used the words hate and love relationship because of the way it overlaps with either with other neighboring concepts such as identification or embodiment. When it comes to section 2, which has to do with risks and opportunities, both panelists were absolutely captivating. So Professor Kwan-Min Lee highlighted that we have opportunities when it comes to finance, new terms for us in the field of psychology, fintech. It was something that we had never had the opportunity to hear before. Decision-making and how people might be influenced positively in terms of their decisions through virtual reality means. Professor Rattan said a very interesting phrase. I think it conveyed the whole message there, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And he said, we always had concerns. There's a concern from the public regarding how mass media can influence public opinion. And he highlighted that he prefers to view the positive side and the pro-social agenda, to use his own words. And then finally, we had to close with the area of state of evidence, empirical evidence, and research priorities, where our panelists, if I remember well, Professor Rattan said that we have been very prolific during the COVID-19 pandemic, another positive thing, with many studies coming out about Proteus effect and other relevant concepts, and suggesting that there is a replication of different of the same theoretical concepts into different contexts, such as self-presence in fintech, self-presence in other areas, and he proposed that might not enrich the literature. That was, I sense, the point of disagreement with Professor Kwan-Min Lee, where he said that investigating the same concept in different contexts can actually provide avenues for new knowledge. And then you started bombarding the audience with different concepts and ideas, which was difficult for me to try to bring together. Ideas such as fidelity to the medium, audio fidelity, visual fidelity, inviting clinical psychology or medical studies in terms of the therapeutic potential of use of new technologies, breaking stereotypes, identity tourism, cross-ethnic embodiment, and how that can help people take the perspective of the other person, the risks of oversimplification. So many different concepts and ideas came in. And when it comes to the critical question, the collaboration of scholars and industry, I will once again return to what Professor Rattan highlighted. We need regulation, we need policies, because pro-social usage and a pro-social agenda for companies is something we all wish for. But when it comes to companies and organizations which make profit, I think the agenda has another priority, or may have another priority on top. And this is where governments should come in to regulate the interests and to protect the public, or to use this exciting potential, which I agree that exists there, for the benefit of the public. That saying, I need to admit as a kind of sin here that this lab, the cyber psychology lab in VU, until now has been primarily engaged with the disordered usage of social media, where both presence and self-presence have also been implicated. So when it comes to gaming disorder, we know now that there is a significant relationship, a significant effect to users or excessive gamers feeling as if they are there and feeling as if they are their avatars. So I guess without having an answer, I feel that we are ending this webinar with many more questions than what we started, and definitely feeling present and engaged in the conversation. And yeah, I'm delighted with everything I heard. Pete.
Thank you, Vas. Yes, I really enjoyed it and feel quite inspired, and I've got a lot of things racing through my mind and ideas for research, especially the stuff around autism and spectrum and the potential there for practicing social interaction. And there's so much just in that. So in closing, I'd like to thank Professors Lee and Rattan for that really insightful panel discussion. And I'm sure our audience will feel inspired, and a lot of great research and applications will come out of it. I'd also like to thank Taylor and Trent for the great job in hosting the discussion. Also, I'd like to thank Vas and the VU events team for putting this webinar on. I'm sure everyone's enjoyed it. Yeah, so on behalf of the Cyber Psychology Research Group here at Victoria University's Institute for Health and Sport, I'll now close the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And thanks to all the students who came.
Yes. It's going to be recorded, so you can share it on your social media and more students can attend it. And we can also have questions under the video, because we're not going, and comments. We are going to turn off the comments and the questions arising. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Great.
Bye.